I think I got everything turned on like I'm supposed to have, so we'll get going here. Do appreciate everybody being here. Like I said, we're going to be studying the Gospel of John, as you can see. Before we begin, Jimmy, could you lead us in a word of prayer? Get started.
Dear Holy Father in heaven, we bow before you this morning with grateful hearts, thankful for this opportunity we have to gather together to open your word, to study, and to increase our faith. Dear Lord, we ask that you be with Chuck this morning as he leads this discussion, and we ask that you be with us and help us open our minds and our hearts that we might be able to understand your will for us. Dear Lord, please be with us and continue to guide our steps daily. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Like I said, just a little bit, I guess as you get older, you reminisce a little bit about stuff or think about it. And I just wanted to mention this at the beginning. I think it's not just a little bit of reminiscing, but also thinking about to kind of help us all as we get started in this study. The first time I ever taught an adult class was back in 1995, and it was this book. It was the Gospel of John. I taught it with a fellow by the name of Richard Peterson, who was an elder at the time at Manslick Road in Louisville. And he was, I don't think two people could be more opposite than, and Amy knows him, they could be more opposite than Richard and I. Richard is he was an engineer at General Electric. I say past tense, he's still is, or he's retired now. Oh, I'm sorry if anybody needs a workbook. Anybody does need a book? Everybody got one? Okay, we're good. So, anyway, so so I wanted to get into teaching. So I was I'd asked the elders about it, and I was like, of all the elders there, he was like the one I probably didn't want to work with, because I was like, I thought we were just total opposites, and just, he was a very intellectual guy, and I just thought this is not going to be a fun experience, but it turned out to be a great experience. He was just super nice to me, super kind, and just really was motivational about it, and it meant a lot to me. And I thought about that as I was getting ready to teach, and because I had not thought about it being 30 years or almost 31 years ago that I had taught this the first time. And so I texted him this week and told him, and thanked him again for it. But the reason I bring that up, not just to reminisce on my side, but just to remind everybody that I think it's something for all of us to keep in mind, that when we're a young person and we're kind of getting nervous about teaching the first time or whatever, there is somebody out there to help you out, right? And to encourage you, and sometimes it can come from a very different source, right? It can be somebody that you don't have a lot in common with, or you don't think you do. But like I said, he and I got to be close friends and have stayed friends, and anyways, I just thought that was a good one. And then now to come full circle to be 30-something years later, and now I'm teaching the book again. And so with being a quarter format, Miles had prepared this material when he was here in the training program, and so I just took advantage of that. So, and I will say this: I don't know how many everybody's kind of different. This morning I got some introductory stuff that I want to talk about before we get into Miles's first his introduction, as far as that goes. But I will tell you this to start with: as we go through this book, if some of the questions seem a little bit off, or like, man, they're a little hard, or like, I don't know where exactly he's going with that, I've got to tell you one on Miles, because I thought the same thing as I started going through these, and I'm like, what was he trying to get at on that question? And I actually texted the boy and I asked him, I said, Miles, what were you thinking on this question? And I said, what answer were you looking for? And I forget, it's something in the first lesson. And he goes, well, there's no right answer, Dad. And I said, well, there's always a right answer, son. And so I was like, and so we're going back and forth. But he goes, well, it's just meant to be a thought provoking. I said, so what did you have in mind? And he goes, well, I really don't know. And I'm like, so I was like, okay, so that ended that one. So we're just going to wing this thing. So if you got any questions about the workbook, don't text Miles. But no, I'll joke. But no, he did, as you see, if you look at the table of contents, he did he does it by different subjects. We pretty much following the book through. This first couple lessons are a little different. We're going to talk about the first 18 verses this morning, hopefully get to that in a little bit. But before we get into anything else, I'll always try to do this in the first class when I'm teaching pretty much anything, is I just kind of get the bearings on where everybody's at. I know everybody in here has studied the Gospel of John before, but what first comes to mind about the Gospel of John? When you bring up and you thought about, okay, I'm going to walk into this class and we're going to be studying the Gospel of John, what, Dorothy?
The Word of flesh, the Word became flesh.
The Word became flesh. I'm gonna write some of these down. What else? Oh, you can't get out that easy. No. Oh, that don't find a pen that rhymes. Word became flesh. What else? What else about the book?
Come and see. Jesus says that a couple times to the prospective apostles, and then it's turned around, and with Lazarus, they say that to Jesus. So there's this idea that of understanding being somewhat experiential rather than just intellectual. Jesus tells the apostles to come and see, where he's staying.
Okay.
And then Jesus literally came and see and experienced humanity and what we go through.
And the woman at the well too, right? I mean, doesn't she say that to the townspeople, right? She said that to the townspeople. So, yes. Okay, go ahead.
John 20, 30, and 31. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So the record of the signs and the miracles were for us so that we could believe in him.
Okay, many, I'm sure right there, many signs. Sorry. What else? Yes. I ams. All right. This board's too low, so I'm going to have to stay on the top here. I ams. What else? These are all good. What else? Anything else? Yeah. All right. Yeah. It's probably the most memorized verse in Scripture, other than Jesus wept, probably. What else? Anything? Like I said, just so we're gonna. What I put down, and I don't know where I first heard this, and mine's not real. It's not real profound, but it's this gospel and talking about and this is in relation to the synoptics, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's more the Gospel of John to me. It's more about who he is than what he did. And I hope that makes sense to everybody. Not taking away that it talks about what he did in the sense, but how does and we're going to talk about that this morning, of where he starts the gospel, right? What does John hit the ground running with? And what is he going to hit he just comes right out of the gates with it. In the beginning, yeah, he starts like he wants to establish, and we are not doing that much of an introduction in this, but when you think about the Gospel of John, it's more than likely everybody, pretty much secular history records that it was the last of the Gospels, that his audience would have been very familiar with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that obviously the history of John, goes to the end he's the longest living of the apostles by secular history. He lived to probably right at 100 AD. This was probably more historians will put it in that 70 to 90 range as far as this and the letters that he wrote, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and in the book of Revelation. So all that, and so all this other Matthew, Mark, and Luke were already recorded, right? And so the people would have known that. So he's like not just in the early stages of the church. The church has been established for a few years, and so now he's fighting in some ways, this gospel and Gnosticism that's going to come up in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He's going to talk about that, but here he's going to hit them. He's going to okay, here's what I know firsthand about this man, Jesus. And so that's what I mean by when I say that. It's more about who he is than what he did. So he's going to hit the ground running with who Jesus was and who he is. Does that make sense? Hopefully. I'm not trying to steer anybody in a direction there. Then the next thing I wanted to talk about was some of the differences. And y'all, we didn't really wanted to talk about here is what are some of the things that are not in the Gospel of John because of that. You think of any things that are not recorded? I'm just going to put them up here because I know everybody's the account of Jesus' birth, like I said, it doesn't talk about that. It doesn't record the genealogy there. Jesus' baptism, it's referred to by John the Baptist in the 1st chapter because he talks about he's the Holy Spirit descending, but he doesn't have a textual account of that. There's no record of the temptation by Satan or the transfiguration. It's not recorded in the Gospel of John. The appointment of the apostles, RC, got a little happy there with the button, giving away what. So the appointment of the apostles, the institution of the Lord's Supper. Again, he has 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 dedicated to that upper room, and not only the conversation that he has with the apostles, and then the subsequent prayer in chapter 17, but he doesn't give a first-hand account of the institution of the Lord's Supper like the Gospels do. And the Great Commission is not stated like it is in the other. And also, and this was probably the one that gets noted the most when people talk about the Gospel of John, is the fact of the parables, right? How many, that's probably the cornerstone of the other Gospels, right? Of all the parables, teaching, and things like that. But some will, I have heard some, and I wouldn't be dogmatic about this either way, but some will say the I am statements can be considered. I've heard people make that's as close as it comes to parables, is, how he's making himself, these emblems, these metaphors that he uses. So, but again, they're not parables. Now, you already saw this side. There's a few things, notable things that are here that are not recorded other places. One is the miracle of the water to wine. The second one is the discussion with Nicodemus, and that's where, somebody mentioned John 3:16. So in chapter 3, we'll get to that here next week, hopefully. And then the discussion with the Samaritan woman, we talked about that, or mentioned that just a minute ago. And then finally, the raising of Lazarus. Those are recorded in the book of John, but not in the other accounts. All right. And then somebody touched on this. I think Leah mentioned this. And if we want to look at a theme of the book, really you can kind of look at it twofold. One is he hits the ground running really with this first 5 verses, right? But then he does, as Leah quoted there, and everybody, he does clearly state there in chapter 20, and truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ and that the Son of God, and believing you may have life in his name. So he clearly states what he means, what the apostles, or what he means, what the theme of the book is. Any questions about that?
Well, I feel like when I'm looking for things related to the crucifixion and resurrection, this is the book that I go to first. Because, it starts like his last week starts in John chapter 12 or 11.
Yeah.
That's like half the book.
Yeah.
Okay, and some of the other books, it'll be the last 3 chapters or 2 chapters.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so he spends a lot of time talking about what happened to Jesus in the very last week of his life.
Yeah, he does definitely concentrated there, right? And he's just a very, and again, not to, and I always like to think, and I don't know if this helps or hurts people, or everybody thinks about things differently, but I think about, the writer, sometimes we I don't know if we gloss over that, but you think about the Apostle John. At this point, you've ever been around older Christians that all their contemporaries have passed? You talk to folks that maybe are in their 80s or their 90s, and all their friends. I remember Amy's stepdad lived to be 93, was it? And everybody he'd been friends with his entire life were gone. And, but yet you think about John in that respect, right? So here he is recounting, the events that changed his life. And I think that's something to think about, that although he had the Holy Spirit, he was divinely inspired to record this. He's still a human being, and he's still recording this man, this person, this in Jesus that forever changed his life. And I think that, and I think, and the reason I bring that back to full circle, what Tim's bringing up, is the fact of what impact do you think that last week had on John? Do you think he ever, we sometimes talk about that as far as when we take her to the Lord's Supper. I don't think John ever had to remember, had to get, think about that, right? Or any of the apostles for that matter, of, being focused on what happened. And I think about, we see that recorded later on that, most likely he was the one there at the cross that, that he was actually the care of Jesus' mother was put in his hands, right? So, you think about the impact that last week had on his life. It wouldn't have been something, those are those moments in your life that are, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what to put in perspective, right? I mean, it's like with the birth of a child, or your, whatever moments come into your life that you can. And our daughter just turned 34, and I can tell you, I can remember what I was wearing. I can, you remember every little thing that happened that evening. I remember getting yelled at by Amy for eating White Castles, so in the waiting room. But I mean, there's things that stick with you, right? But that's a great point you make, Tim. And I think that it shows the focus that it had, and then sevens. These are there's twofold here. There's one is the signs that are recorded here. These metaphorical signs. The water to wine. I'm just going to put them up here so you have time to write them down. One more, is that it? Yeah. The water to wine in chapter 2. The healing of the official son in chapter 4. The healing of the lame man at Bethesda in chapter 5. The feeding of the 5,000 in chapter 6. The walking on the water in chapter 6. The healing of the man born blind in chapter 9. And then the raising of Lazarus in chapter 11. And then also was mentioned, it was asking what other folks remembered about the book, and that's the I am statements. These are the metaphors. I kind of jumped around there. The metaphor, he says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd in chapter 10, and I'm the resurrection. I'll kind of put these up here and we'll talk about them a little bit. But again, he talks about the signs that are done, and then all these I ams. Now, everybody makes this list, and it's a good list, but can you think of any other signs that are done in the book that there's not up there? The biggest one, right? What's that? The resurrection, yeah. So I mean, I think everybody, does that as far as that, and then I also will mention on the I am side. Can you think of any other I ams in the book besides these?
Before Abraham was, I am.
There you go. Now these, like I said, and that's where I got mixed up when talk about these are, Jesus uses these as as metaphors as far as for what his role was, the I ams. But to what Matthew just said, the I am obviously that he says is not a metaphor. He was I am, right? He is I am, and we're going to talk about that in these first 18 verses. But and then also, you can also say that when he meets with the Samaritan woman, he also makes that comment, I am, because she asks who he is, right? And he says, I am he. And so he makes that about himself a couple of times as well. But these, again, he comparing it to himself to, some other items. What, anything else about those? Everybody, like I said, I want to give everybody time to write them down. Like I said, this is just, and we're going to go through these and we're going to talk about them as we go through the study this quarter, but I just want to put them out there to begin with. It's just, I think it's good to just kind of get get everybody's kind of thinking about them and all that. But again, so anything about those? Everybody got them written down that wants to write them down or take a picture of them? All right, so now we're going to finally get into Miles' stuff. So I gave my 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll get into this. I just thought, because like I said, not knowing what everybody has, Miles does the book a little bit different. Like I said, if you looked at that, the introduction for the first 18 verses is really just a little, 2 or 3 pages that Miles wrote. I thought it was pretty, I think he's always been a good writer, so I give him credit for that. I thought he did a real good job expressing, I think, the sentiment for these first 18 verses. And for what we're going to talk about this morning, we're just going to break it down. And I think for like I said, for where we're at in the study here, we're going to try to get through this part of the chapter. We'll get through the introduction, and then next week I will mention that we have lesson 1 and lesson 2 actually cover chapter 1 or the rest of chapter 1 and the 19 verses 19 through chapter 3 of 20, chapter 3. So try to do that for next week. We'll try to cover, like I said, lesson 1 and 2. I think that'll flow through. And what I'm going to try to do, just a real quick, before we get to this outline, is what I want to try to do each week is, obviously, if you've gone through or looked at the book already, Miles has, and I think I put it up here? I actually didn't put this out of order that I wanted to kind of cover it. But if you go back, if you just skip over a couple pages real quick, because in case we don't get to this today, if you look on page 5 of lesson 1, I meant to put that in front of this so I could kind of discuss this. Miles has set the book up to where the first part of each lesson, other than the introduction, he has, if you see at the top of page 5, you're going to have the reading for the lesson. And then he also focuses, and I think properly so, he focuses on that idea of he wants, in that reading, record any time or anything where you see the hour mentioned, or my hour in Jesus' terms. And then if you want to hold your finger there and look all the way to the very last page of the book, or last page of the workbook, it's on the last page. It says references to the hour, or he has the appendix on the left, and then you can read through that, and then he has the references to the hour or my time, etc. in the book of John. So he has all of them listed there. So just kind of keep that in perspective. And one of the things that I wanted to add, or that I wanted to make mention of, is just so I don't forget this at the end of class, as you're reading this, is just look at. It's coming. Let me make sure I don't forget this. There's three, when you read through those, the hour, there's going to be, just look at when you read through those in the book, not yet, is coming, and has come. Just as you're reading through the references to the hour when you're doing your study, as we go through this book, and I'll kind of come back to this, but try to put them in one of those 3 buckets. And I think you'll see what I'm talking about as you're reading. It's probably kind of like, what is he thinking right now? But I think you'll see as you go through those, and when you see the references to the hour or my time, I think you'll see the context of how it's used. It's either going to be that it's not yet come, it is coming, or it has come. Okay? That makes sense? So just as you read through it, just kind of, and you may find it, well, Chuck, I don't think it fits in either one of those 3 buckets, but I think you'll see what I'm talking about, because I think it plays a good point. And actually the one that comes to mind is what? The first one, the not yet. Water to wine, right? He says to his mother, my time has not yet come. And I think you'll see that all those references to the hour or my time, I think you'll see that it kind of fit in one of those 3 buckets. So just, you humor me, and as you go through that, just kind of look at that for me, and that I think that'll kind of help out. But anyways, he mentions that, or Miles mentions that as a kind of a running that he that stood out to him in the book, and I think that's a great point to make. And so, like I said, he kind of has his little appendix there as far as that. But back to the lessons themselves, you see the scripture reading, you'll see that reference to the hour, just, make a note, and it may or may not be in the reading we have that week that, like I said, he kind of gives you the answer there at the end of the book. And then these first 3 questions really is what others are saying about Jesus in that particular reading, what Jesus says about himself, and then just any general notes or questions you might have about the reading. And so then from that, then we're going to have, he has about 10 questions in each lesson that are, like I said, I joked about that at the beginning, just thought questions, and they really are thought questions. And I know, like I told y'all, he didn't have in mind any particular answer. So just kind of whatever you think and is, kind of there. And what I'd like to do, because I don't think we'll have time to cover all 10, but what we'll probably do, and I've done that for the next week, is we'll just throw them up there. And if there's one particular one, what I'd like for y'all to do is just, if there's one in particular that you want to concentrate on, say, hey, what's number 6, or I'd like to talk about number 8, or whatever the case might be. And we don't have to follow them. I'm not just going to go 1 through 10 and answer the question. So if there's any one that stuck out, because I imagine if one of the questions stuck out to one of you, then it's probably something that others want to talk about as well. So we'll kind of cover through that as we go through the lessons from after today. So. All right, so that's a little housekeeping, getting that out of the way. So let's just look at these first 5 verses. And Tim, you want to read John 1 through 5 for me, please?
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it.
All right. So just some thoughts from that. We talked about this already a little bit, where he starts it. John does, and from Miles's, and this is a little bit of notes from what Miles had written there. John echoes Genesis 1:1 to ground Jesus into creation. Jesus is the eternal Word, fully God and with God. All things were made through him. Jesus is the sword of life and light, and the light overcomes the darkness. And just some of the questions are just from this section. Just wanted to ask a couple things. Why does John begin with the creation language? Why do you think he does that? What do you?
He's establishing the deity of Jesus.
Yeah.
That he goes back to the beginning. He's not somebody that was just an addendum. He's not a prophet that was here. He was the Son of God that was from the beginning.
Yeah. Very good. Sounds good. What? Anything? Yes.
I would think that for 2 reasons. Number one of the, now correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the more early debates was whether or not Jesus was truly divine or not. I don't know if that was around during John's time. I don't think
Well-
it was, but I also know that they also faced against the dominant religion at the time, which was Roman mythology, which was all about their gods and what they did.
Yeah.
And if they did go where we secularly know them to go, like Thomas to India or anything like that, everywhere else had a lot of their own creation trilogy, their own creation stories,
Yeah.
like Kronos with the Greek mythology or anything really.
Yeah.
So to begin with, this rules everything else out.
Yeah.
So, and at the time, last thing, sorry,
Yeah.
it was very much hey, your God is here, my God is here. They can both coexist
Yeah.
because Athena is over here, Rome's over here, whatever. And that was the general idea at the time. But here, Christianity coming around goes, no, there are no other gods. There's only one.
Jimmy?
To kind of go along with what Tim was saying, also, to me, it's basically establishing, from a human perspective, you see Jesus when he was born, and then we see when he died. And from a human perspective, okay, there's the beginning, there's the end. But this is saying, no,
Yeah.
he is the true Son of God. He's been here the whole time. He was just on earth, the beginning and the end. But he's God. He's deity. And it's like I say, it's still, it's hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes.
Yeah.
But, and I think just as to get it in this book, as he's writing to the people, hey, he wasn't just a person.
Yeah.
He was truly God's son,
Yeah.
deity.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to hopefully get to verse 14 here in a little bit, but that's, you're getting your head wrapped around it is right there. I think Tim just concluded that study on the prophecy and fulfilled prophecies, and one of the things I know you talked about quite a bit, and it kind of comes into play here, is talking about the nominations and different things coming up. One of the things in studying for this was that it mentioned about and the Word was with God there in verse 1, that I think what I read was that Jehovah's Witnesses will deny that verse and say that it should, instead of saying in the beginning was the Word and the Word was with God, it should say was a God, lowercase. So that's to your point about him being, God in the sense of eternal, that they look at him as, being, and that's how they kind of justify that. It's just like a typo, that it's, instead of being God, he was God, that it was mentioned that. But I think that's where, again, whatever impacted, and I think, and I was going to mention this earlier too, is that as we go through the book of John and you read it, and I meant to ask this when we were doing the little bit of introduction earlier. I think if you hand the book of John, at least in my opinion, if you hand the book of John to somebody that has no belief whatsoever and say, hey, if I handed the book to, say, if Sean, say you had nothing to know about the Bible, say you're just totally clueless about it, I hand this to you and say, hey, read this and you tell me what you think John felt about this man Jesus. You know what I'm saying? And if you did that, I think pretty clear you're going to, whether you believe it or not, you're going to walk away from that knowing what? John believed he was the creator. John believed he was God, and we're going to know that he was the Word, that and how did I just answered my own question. How did God bring about creation? He spoke it into existence, right? So that's where you think about, and I think that's where he talks about, so there's a lot of things about Jesus that John, like I said, kind of jumps into the deep end of the pool here in the first 5 verses and just gets it, puts it on the table right away of what he feels that Jesus, where Jesus fits and things. And again, I kind of answered this one already, but what does it mean that Jesus is called the Word? Yeah, man.
Kind of identifies his relationship to the Father. He's the one that gets sent out and that accomplishes the Father's will, just like at creation.
Yep.
The
Perfect.
Word went forth and created the world.
Perfect. That's beautiful. Perfect. Anybody else? That's spot on. And then how does Jesus, and I think we've kind of talked about this one already as well, but how does Jesus being creator shape how we view him? How did it shape what John thought?
He wasn't created. He was there always.
Yeah.
He was there at the creation. So again, it speaks to him being truly deity in fellowship with God and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it's just, and one of the little passage, and when I'm teaching a book, I try to stay in that book as much as possible. But I think here I did want to read Colossians 1, verses 16 and 17, because I think it's just a very powerful statement about this. And Paul says there in Colossians 1, verse 16 and 17, it says, "For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist." And so that's, exactly where Tim was just saying there. So again, I think that's where, and again, I just keep, I don't know a better way to emphasize it, but just John to me just hits the ground running. He's just going to go after it, as far as what he personally, his personal conviction is on this. And so then, yes, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
1 John 1, 2, and 3, I think, do a pretty good job of explaining how he is the Word.
Okay.
Let me read that.
Yeah, go ahead.
"The life was manifested, and we have seen and bear witness, and declare to you that eternal life which was with the Father and was manifested to us, that which we have seen and heard we declare to you, that you also may have fellowship with us, and truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ." So it makes it pretty clear there.
Very good. I appreciate that. What was that scripture again? That was
1 John 1, 2, and 3.
1 John 1, 2, and 3. Thank you, Tim. So again, just the emphasis on who he was, his role as Matthew said, and it was set out in the creation process. All right, and then this idea of the light, which we're going to see through the book, but in verses 6 through 13. Tim, do you mind reading that for me?
John 1, 6 through 13.
Yes, please.
"There came a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came from a witness, that he might bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came that he might bear there was the true light which, coming into the world, enlightens every man. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who is born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God.
Thank you, Tim. All right, so some of the things here it points out, and it kind of breaks it into three parts there in those verses there. But John the Baptist is sent to testify about the light. What does it say there? I mean, we're going to look at some of that in chapter 1 or lesson 1. But what was John's role here? What does he state there? The bear witness, right? And we talk about humble characters and I'll talk about this a little bit next week in John 1, or lesson 1. But I don't know that anybody, I think sometimes at work, I don't know if it's everybody uses this kind of phrase or not. But you ever have somebody at work that maybe doesn't know your job or know too much, and they kind of get in your business, or you say it's somebody in accounting starts talking about production, or production starts talking about accounting, or whatever. What do we sometimes say about that kind of thing when people cross over like that? What do you stay in your own lane, right? Stay in your own lane. If there was ever somebody in my mind that stayed in their lane, it was John, right? And I don't mean that in a bad sense, but I think he knew his role. He was clear about his role. And he went out, he stayed in his lane, right? And even when his disciples, he knew, and we're going to talk about, and like I said, we'll talk about that in lesson 1, is that, to me, that's the way I think about John, is that he stayed in his lane. I mean, if anybody could have been, think about that. If you're hosting somebody, somebody that's of some authority or whatever, and you're getting to get up and introduce them or something like that. That's an honor, right? I mean, that's a privilege in that respect. But John knew his role, and he knew what his role was in this, and he came to bear witness of that light. And he was, and it mentions there not being the light. And when we talk about this, and again, we'll kind of talk about this in one of those, and we talked about the I ams earlier. But what is it about light? What is it, and we talk about this in other, aspects, but why is light so important? I mean, why is that such a strong analogy for Christ or Jesus?
Dispels darkness. Darkness can't touch it.
Yeah, can't touch it, right? You can't have both, right? I mean, it's just, it's an absolute there. And so he, in just talking about that, but, it does that. And whether, whether somebody, and light's going to be there, right? Whether you want to deny it or not. I mean, somebody could say they don't believe in the sun, but what does that matter? I mean, I was talking about the S-U-N sun, not but if somebody said they didn't believe in the sun, like what does that do for them? It still came up this morning, didn't it? I mean, it's like, it's that kind of thing. And I think that idea of that light and the darkness, and we'll talk about that in later studies, but just that idea of how powerful that is in regard. Let's look at some of the questions there. And with that idea about the light, why do you think people reject it? I mean, if you just had to, I know that's a big question right there. It's a pretty broad one to ask this early on a Sunday morning, but what, in say, in this time with John, or if just in general, what is it about light that people might reject, Jim?
Light makes everything visible.
Yeah,
Think about it.
yeah,
So there's a lot of things that people don't want visible.
yeah. I mean, it does put a spotlight on it, right? You ever had folks come over to your house and maybe it's, not quite as clean as you like it, and, the sunlight comes up and it shows every little bit of dust on that furniture or whatever it might be, and that, just like, okay, it puts a spotlight on things, right? Yeah,
When you've been in the dark so long and you get into the light, it hurts your eyes.
yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes the transition, for real, that's a good point. What else? Anything else? Yeah, Jim?
Light requires holiness.
Yeah,
And that requires effort.
yeah,
And so it's a lot easier to be in the dark.
yeah. That's That's a good point. Yeah, that's like, I think, they talk about crimes and things like that, just the percentages, of things like that. People, just the being in the light, being in that, having the spotlight on something of that nature. So, and then again, this one is one that gets abused quite a bit by the world. But in this point, and just in this context, it says there, it says, but many, and this is kind of jumps down to verse 12. It says, but many as received him, to them he gave them the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, not of will of the flesh, not of the will of man, but of God. But what does it mean to receive Jesus? Sean?
Well, in this context, I have highlighted right behind it, gave them the right to become children of God,
Yeah.
but not actually made them the children of God yet. So receive is the same way that you took in the message.
Yeah.
I think from this verse,
Yeah.
talking about that, that's not necessarily doing what he's called to do, but simply just, oh, you got the message. Like, I sent you the text. Can you come to my house to help me move my furniture?
Yeah.
And I can see you read it.
Yeah. Well, it's just
What
the old.
you gonna do, bud?
Yeah, I know. It's like the old analogy. I don't know if how this dates anybody. If anybody's heard this for a long time, but it used to be the old analogy of preacher would get up and have a $50 bill in his hand and say, "Tim, I want to give you this $50." Well, what's Tim got to do, right?
Come get it.
He's got to come get it, right? That's the idea of receiving. So, again, that idea of having that reception to Jesus. And again, thinking back to the writer here, John, and just thinking about all that he would have seen in that, 90 plus years that most folks think he lived on this earth, and just thinking what he would have seen, how many people he would have seen accept the gospel, accept Jesus, but then also how many people he would have seen, walk away from it. Can you imagine living that age and how many people he would have seen had just made shipwreck of their faith, and not follow through with it. So, and have turned their back on the light. So, again, I think it's to me that just helps me when I and again, I don't know if that works or helps other folks, but when I read books like and knowing what thinking about the writer and them personally what they would have been maybe thinking or going through, not that you know what they're going through, but just kind of understand, putting yourself in their place a little bit. So, and then and this is a big one here. I thought this was hopefully a good question to ask, is how does being a child of God change identity and purpose? And I know there's a lot to that one as well, I think, but how does that change us? How should, go
You're not living for yourself anymore. You're living for God.
Yeah, and what else? Yeah, that's spot on. Yeah, man.
It's their source of authority who we obey.
Yep, it's exactly. I think there's no doubt, and again, going back to John, is there any doubt at all? I mean, when you read through this, that where he would have been on that, right? As far as, totally committed, all in, whatever analogy or whatever words you want to say, he would have been, totally into it. And then let's, is class in at 45 or is it 50? Okay. Thank you. I was just making sure I wasn't running too short on time. All right, let's, somebody want to read 14 through 18 for me? Yes, Sean, go ahead.
And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. For from his fullness we have received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known."
Thanks. Thank you. So here, and one of the couple of things that I did read about this, and one of the folks I was reading, it was like he started the whole section about talking about this section of Scripture. He was like, I'm first and foremost want to say I cannot fully, like Jimmy said earlier, fully comprehend in that first verse and our first part of verse 14 when it says the Word become flesh and dwelt among us. To get your head totally wrapped around that, I can't. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. That was what I read about it. Is like, okay, to fully, comprehend that, I don't think we can this side of heaven. That's just my, opinion. Everybody, is at a different level, but just, there's certain things. Obviously, we take on faith, and I think that's one of them. Sean.
I think that's the importance of it too. Like we can't fathom what it's like to be split into three,
Yeah.
but all be the same.
Yeah.
That's why so many people had argues with it because they couldn't wrap their head around it, and then therefore, because I can't wrap my head around it, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Yeah.
That's horrible logic.
Yeah. But I think that's where it just, and to understand it, I mean, and like I said, to have the belief in it, to try to, live our lives fully, to focus on it is important. And, but some of the things there he brought out, the eternal word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus reveals the glory in human form, a glory of God in human form. He brings grace and truth, fulfilling the law. Jesus makes the Father known, and God is revealed fully and personally through Christ. Yeah. And then I think there's an interesting one there. Can you think about some times in the Old Testament, that second one there about the glory of God? Can you think of a couple of times where it talks about the glory of God?
Think about when Moses, when God passed him, and his glory was so great, his face shone.
Yeah, Colin, what are you going to say?
I was going to say the same thing. He told
Okay.
Moses
Okay.
and had to turn as he passed by.
All right. There's a couple, Matthew?
With both the tabernacle and the temple, you have the glory show up as a cloud.
Yep.
And apparently it was so significant they couldn't go in.
Yeah. And I think that's the one I was going to think. But it's interesting to note, and again, if it's there, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't believe after the exiles and coming back and the rebuilding of the temple, it's never stated there. It's stated when the tabernacle was originally built and the temple was originally built that the glory of God dwelled there. But when they came back after captivity, and they rebuilt the temple, I don't believe anywhere in Ezra or Nehemiah does it mention that the glory of God dwelling there. So I think that is very significant here, as far as maybe a subtle thing, but I think it is significant here that he talks about the glory of God coming through in Jesus, and in that respect here. I think it maybe not gets talked about a lot, but I think that's a significant point. And I appreciate y'all bringing those up. And I had forgotten about the one with Moses, so I thank y'all for that. But he talks about here bringing the grace and truth. Let's just look at the questions here. And it says, why is the incarnation essential? How does Jesus reveal God differently than the prophets? And what does grace and truth look like in Jesus' life? Look at that second one there. How does Jesus reveal God differently than the prophets? What do you think about that one?
Said in the beginning of Hebrews that in past times he spoke through the prophets, but now it is through Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's Hebrews 1. In the beginning of that book, he talks about that, and it's very significant that he is God, and that he is different, and it is a different way. And then looking at that, what does grace and truth look like in Jesus' life? It says there in verse 17, for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. What do you think? And we're going to talk about that some more in subsequent lessons, but what does that look like in Jesus' life?
Well,
Matthew?
in chapter 8, you see a contrast where they bring in the woman caught in the act of adultery and say the law commands us to stone such women. And he forgives her.
Yeah.
But that's the grace part. But
Yeah.
Truth is also present there, and go and sin no more.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great example. Anything else? Any other thoughts there? I got through just what I wanted to get through, and like I said, I meant to put this at the first of that other, like I mentioned this earlier, so you'll see this same, like I said, for lesson, for next week, hopefully lesson 1 and 2, we'll have, like I said, we'll just really start at 119 and go through the end of chapter 3. So that'll kind of cover lesson 1 and 2, and we'll, like I said, we'll try to hit on the question that y'all decide are important. So, so we'll try to do that. Is there any questions? Anybody's got any thoughts? All right. Well, I do appreciate everybody, and I'll let y'all get out of here a minute or so early. So thank y'all so much. Appreciate it.